All right, welcome everyone. My name is Andy, and I'm with the Democratic Socialists of America's International Committee and the co-chair of our Mexico Working Group. Welcome to our webinar, Damming the Iron River, How DSA Can Help Stop U.S. Arms Trafficking into Mexico. We are very excited to have with us today John Lindsay Poland from Global Exchange and their Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico project. With over two-thirds of illegal arms confiscated in Mexico tracing back to the United States, and with violence of organized crime serving as a primary cause for migration waves out of Mexico, as well as U.S. right-wing propaganda points leveraged in escalating calls for an invasion into Mexico, we believe this topic is more crucial than ever for socialists in the United States. As you're going to hear a bit from John, Texas and Arizona play a primary role in the weapons trafficking into Mexico. So we've made it a point to invite members from the Texan and Arizonan chapters to this event today, with the hope that they will first learn about this issue, as well as the active campaign work happening and potential future work to interrupt gun flow. Second, that these members from the Texan and Arizonan chapters get inspired to join the International Committee and our Mexico Working Group in order to join in on our ongoing international solidarity and anti-imperialist work. And third hope has been that perhaps we might even build up our own project down the line or campaign to help stop the U.S. arms trafficking that's happening into Mexico, maybe even in as like joint work with Global Exchange. Um, but yes, as again, as you're going to hear shortly, Texas and Arizona are pretty key in this work. So we really do hope that members from those chapters, or just anyone who's inspired, will join us. We'll make sure that all our attendees have the appropriate links and channels in order to do that. But why don't we go ahead and move forward with the main content of this event? So we're going to have John present a bit first on this issue. And then after that, we're going to open up the chat to the audience for any questions. You'll go ahead and type in your questions into the chat box, and we can read from those for John to respond. But first, just a little bit about our speaker. So John Lindsay Poland is a writer, activist, researcher, and analyst focused on human rights and demilitarization, especially in the Americas. He is currently co-director of the California Healing Justice Program of the America Friends Service Committee, with a focus on police demilitarization. He writes about, researches, and organizes action for human rights and demilitarization of U.S. policy in Latin America, and currently coordinates Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico, project of Global Exchange. John has co-authored many reports and articles about both the legal and illicit gun trade to Mexico. From 1989 to 2014, he served the Interfaith Pacifist Organization Fellowship of Reconciliation, FOR, as coordinator of the Task Force on Latin America and the Caribbean, as research director, and founded FOR's Colombia Peace Team. From 2003 to 2014, he edited a monthly newsletter focused on Colombia and U.S. policy, Latin America Update. Previously, John served with Peace Brigades International, PBI, in Guatemala and El Salvador, and co-founded PBI's Colombia project in 1994. John lives with his partner, artist James Grolu, in Oakland, California. Okay, so on that, John, do you want to tell us a little about this ongoing issue and the active work happening to stop that gun flow?
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy, and thank you everybody here for taking a part out of your Sunday on this long weekend, and for all the work that you've done. I've uh, collaborated tangentially at different times with DSA on different projects, and have a lot of respect for what DSA has done, and for really the direction that the organization has taken locally and nationally. So thank you. Um, so I'm going to talk today about the flows of guns from the United States to Mexico, both illicit trafficking and as well as legal exports, both of which are a very high volume, which we will see. And um, just a little bit more about me is I really dig into data. and have been able to get very fine-grained data about the movement of firearms, not just between the US and Mexico, but in the hemisphere. Um, and I also am always looking for ways to connect with the people who are impacted by this flow of destructive weaponry. And so in our work in Stop US Arms to Mexico and Global Exchange, we're part of something that started a couple of years ago called the People's Movement for Peace and Justice, which is a bi-national movement of, it's a kind of a movement of movements. So bringing together people who are impacted in both countries by firearms violence, from Afro-descendant communities, from indigenous communities, people working on migration issues, um, because we know that we can't do it alone. We need intersectional movements, and we also know that we can't do it in only one country. Um, and of course, people are impacted in different ways, and so that it's part of our accountability. It's part of it informs our activism and our organizing. So I'm going to share a fair amount of data and or information. And so I hope you do generate questions or comments or thoughts or ideas or and that this is not just like an Ask John thing at the end, but something where together, we can think about how DSA can be engaged on these issues because there are many entry points. Um, so first, I want to talk a little bit about um, who is impacted. This is Don Antonio Tizapa, who is the father of Jorge Antonio Tizapa Leguedeño, who was one of the 43 disappeared in Ayotzinapa in 2014. And the police and the criminal organization involved in that crime were armed with, particularly the police, were armed with U.S. firearms. I'll show that more concretely in a few moments, as well as with firearms from Italy and from Germany. And Antonio lives in the U.S. And we've participated together in a number of different um, activities and trips to Washington where we were doing advocacy. And, he is always trying to remember his son. He's always trying to do more for his son. He has a running project called Running for Ayotzinapa. You can look it up. Um, and he's like, there's no you shouldn't be sending these weapons. Um, and if you were in my place and knew that these weapons were used in the disappearance of one of your family members, you would be doing the same thing that I am doing, which is standing up and just calling for an end to it. And someone who has experienced that much pain, um, it changes your life completely. There's a completely a before and an after. And for those people who have been able to transform that pain into purpose, it's important for us to work with them, to support them, and to follow their lead. So this is more of a quantitative look at over the last 23, 24 years, 20 something years. This is actually from 2003. And you can see that the number of gun homicides has gone up enormously during this period. In fact, before the declaration of the drug war in 2006, and also before the expiration of the U.S. assault weapons ban in 2004, the homicide rate in general was going down. With the drug war, it spikes dramatically. There's a dip during the first couple of years of Peña Nieto's, Mexican President Peña Nieto's administration, and then it keeps going up much more than it even did before. And I put in this orange part representing forced disappearances because the López Obrador administration said, okay, homicides in general and gun homicides in particular have gone down, which was correct. However, at the same time, the number of forced disappearances was going up. And I think if we had 2024 in this graph, we would see that even more so. So that approximately 3 out of every 4 gun homicides is committed with a firearm. That percentage has also gone up over this period of time. If the same percentage of disappearances are committed using firearms in some manner, then that's what this orange block here represents. And we can see that even with that slight decline in the number of gun homicides in the last 3-4 years, that the overall number of either homicides or forced disappearances with the use of a firearm has continued to be as high as it ever was. So one of the important things to know is that this is a structural issue. So 70% of the firearms that are recovered in Mexico and submitted for tracing were sourced from the United States. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that happens. But the United States is unique in the world. There is no other country in relation to firearms like the United States. There are approximately 400,000 firearms in private hands, 400 million, excuse me, firearms in private hands. We have 4%, 4.4% of the world's population, but about 45% of the guns in private hands around the world. And we have more than 77,000 licensed firearms dealers. Now, this map is based on data that we obtained after some litigation from the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF, that shows where guns that were traced to a retail purchase, where they came from in the United States. And you can see they came from all over, right? So they come from hundreds of manufacturers every year. They come from thousands of retail dealers every year. This includes Central America, which is a much smaller number of traced firearms. Mexico has the majority of international firearms that are traced back to the United States in the world, like more than all other countries combined. You can also see that there's a certain concentration of where these things are happening. So I'll talk more about that in a moment as well. But yeah, so one thing I just want to mention is that you can see there's a fair amount in California, particularly Southern California. A lot of those weapons were purchased many years before they were recovered. In other words, those weapons were bought in California. They stayed on the secondary market for some time. Could have been in the United States, could have been in Mexico, more likely in the United States, before they were recovered in Mexico. That's not so true of Texas and Arizona, which we'll get to. But there is this concentration of weapons that are purchased near the border. So you have big cities like Houston and Phoenix and San Antonio where there's a lot. But then you have these smaller towns in Texas and in Arizona, McAllen, Brownsville, Yuma, Arizona, that also they're not big cities. They're small. They're big towns. They're small cities. And Harlingen, Texas, one zip code. And so because the data we got was by the zip code of purchase. It's that fine-grained. And one zip code in Harlingen was the source of almost 250 weapons that were trafficked and recovered and traced. And one important thing to note here is that our data on traced weapons represents only a small fraction of the firearms that are actually trafficked over the border. Most firearms that are trafficked are never recovered, a majority. And then even those that are recovered are either not submitted for tracing or more commonly are not traced to a retail point of purchase. That could be because the serial number was filed off or the dealer went out of business a long time ago, or there's a number of different reasons. But in any case, the proximity to the border is a very important factor in the likelihood or the volume of trafficked firearms. Um, yeah, I'll talk a bit more about that. So here is Houston. Houston is the city in the United States where more firearms have been trafficked and traced back to the city than any other. It is a large city. It also has hundreds of licensed firearms dealers. And this is just a map of based on some data of traces from 2019 and 2020 of the dealers from which these firearms were purchased, just in Houston. So you can see there's an enormous problem there. Um, Now, we've also been able to obtain some data on firearms traffic to the Caribbean. And this has been in the news lately because of what is going on in Haiti. Um, the criminal organizations or gangs control probably about 3/4 of Port-au-Prince, as well as some other parts of the country. Um, the violence is the homicide rate in Haiti, I believe, is now at the first, global first, top of the ranking. Um, and these firearms are primarily coming from Florida, secondarily from Georgia. Um, and it's very easy to get them there. A lot of them are packed into containers and that are going on ships. They're not always going directly to Haiti. A lot of times they're going to the Dominican Republic or to other island countries in the Caribbean and then trafficked from there to Haiti. Um, but there's a drugs for guns exchange, particularly strong in Jamaica. Jamaica also has a very serious firearms problem. So does Barbados, so does DR. And again, these weapons are primarily coming from the United States, from Florida. And here you can see in Miami, so this is the map on the right here is basically Miami metropolitan. And again, from one single zip code, 194 weapons that were trafficked and traced from Caribbean countries. In this case, a majority from the Bahamas, also another source of trafficking to Haiti. So there's been a considerable effort and even interest in Congress, sometimes even the Republicans are interested, rather shocking, in doing more to stem the trafficking from Florida and from the United States to the Caribbean. Um, there's a problem in most efforts that are focused from U.S. government on trafficking, which tends to be that it's focused on illegal actions rather than changing the laws themselves. Okay, so one of the things that I think I mentioned that in California, a lot of guns are purchased and then they stay in the secondary market so that they're actually often, I think it's an average of 8 to 10 years between when a gun is purchased in California and when it's recovered in Mexico. This is showing over time, over a nearly 10-year period, firearms that have a very quick, what we call time to crime. So they were purchased 6 months or less before they were recovered. And that almost always indicates that they were purchased with the intent to traffic them. And in this case, the green in this graph shows Arizona, and on the left is a map of the sources of firearms, trafficked firearms in Arizona. And you can see that, and the orange is Texas. And Texas has been traditionally the major source of trafficked firearms in Mexico, and even in Central America. But over time, Arizona has grown, its role has grown. So when you look at the short time to crime weapons, those weapons that very rapidly went into the hands of organizations that are carrying out considerable violence, then you see Arizona is actually a majority of these. And so that's a very important, it's really, Arizona is now a preferred location for these purchases for trafficked weapons. Um, this just shows how, the bar on the left shows the number of firearms recovered in Mexico, and submitted for tracing. Again, that's there's an estimate out just 3 days ago by an incredible investigation. We'll put in the conversation, the publication of the conversation about gun trafficking to Mexico, that makes a very sophisticated estimate of about, I think they said 130,000 weapons, 125,000 weapons trafficked per year in 2022, actually. And so this is just, a portion of that. Then only a portion of those, I identify the purchase location, and then only a portion of those are investigated by the federal government as an offense, as a crime. And then on the right, you can see the Border Patrol recovers even fewer firearms on the U.S. side, right? These are all the three bars on the left are about guns that were recovered in Mexico. But the U.S. is not doing very much because essentially they're illegal until they cross the border. We'll get to that. I also want to note that in the United States, there's been a lot about assault weapons that are used for mass shootings. They draw a lot of attention. They create an enormous amount of suffering. Yesterday was the 3rd anniversary of the mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas, that killed 17 children. But assault weapons are also even more prominent in crime guns in Mexico and in Central America. And here you can see this, right? The second to the right bar represents the percentage of recovered crime guns that in the United States that are assault rifles. In Mexico, it's about 4 times as much. So they're important because they're like the bread and butter of criminal organizations that want to control territory. So assault weapons are military assets. And so that's why the cartels and other, and criminal organizations want them, because they want to control territory. They want to control businesses, licit and illicit businesses. And assault weapons are very useful for that. I'm pushing up against time here. So this is just one example of a firearms dealer right near the border. They are promoting, the Second Amendment. They're saying that's our only protection against tyranny. And they have been the source of probably of dozens of traced firearms that this new investigation identified as well. Very important weapon in the arsenal of criminal organizations as well as state forces are sniper rifles. The 50 caliber rifle is a very large weapon. It's, 5 feet, approximately 5 feet long, has a very large round. It can shoot accurately a mile away. It can shoot through a truck engine block a mile away. It can down helicopters. It did down a helicopter in Mexico. And in most states, you can buy them like any other firearm, even though there's practically no place to practice with them, no ranges. And in Texas and Arizona, there is not a requirement for a background check for a private sale of a firearm. So in this case, I took this picture a few years ago at a gun show where the guy selling it was like, okay, if you have the cash, you don't need to do a background check. They're expensive, like $11,000-$12,000, but it's yours. And again, there are thousands of gun shows that do not require background checks every year across the United States, and they are an important source for firearms that are trafficked. Again, there's the proximity to the border is there's lots of these dealers that are right near the border, and they're an important source. The one other thing I want to mention before I turn to legal exports is that the efforts to detect and confiscate, seize firearms at the border, I believe, are very limited in their prospects for success, because both the United States and Mexico, despite the tariffs and everything else that the Trump administration has done, have a priority on that trade. And it's enormous. It's absolutely vast. And so to try to find firearms, it's just like the problem of finding fentanyl in traffic coming north. It's a Sisyphean proposition. And so that's, we say we need to go further upstream. We need to go to regulate the market. That's the piece, because it's a structural issue. Okay. I'm, I can see I'm going over time. The Trump administration earlier this month, they held a pair of press conferences, one in Nogales, Arizona, and one in Ohio, saying that they had seized more than 10,000 weapons bound for Mexico. And they did the show in Nogales. This is what's part of what they showed, with all these different federal agency officials talking about it, saying, Trump is really great since January 20th. No one else, the Biden never did this, et cetera, et cetera. But when you look at what they're saying ATF seized guns used by criminals, right? So how many of these were actually bound for Mexico is not at all clear. The Border Patrol, which is the primary federal agency involved in seizing Mexico-bound weapons in the United States, counts, 1 or 200 a month tops. So that's, we should be aware that that could be a publicity effort by the Trump administration. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about exports. And this is a graph of the firearms, but also firearms parts, munitions, and as well as more heavier arms like machine guns and rocket launchers exported from the United States to Mexico over the last 24 years. And you can see that it goes way up with the Merida Initiative when the drug war is declared. And these are sales, right? This is not assistance. This is not coming from the US taxpayer. This is being paid for by Mexico. And then it peaks even more in 2023. And if we saw 2024, it would be similar to 2023. In the last 2 years, Mexico has been on a buying spree, which I'll show in just a second. When the National Guard was formed by López Obrador in 2019, there was also a major purchase of more than 50,000 handguns for the National Guard in 2000, right at the beginning of the pandemic. So Mexico is, if we compare Mexico to the rest of Latin America, it is by far the largest customer for US exported firearms by a lot. And so this is how it's gone. It just increased over time. The National Guard that was formed supposedly as a civilian body to replace the federal police, to fight organized crime, has instead, its deployments have been primarily to detain migrants. The operations against organized crime have been minimal. Of course, a lot of the move and the deployment of Mexican forces against migrants has been at the behest of the United States, both the Trump and Biden administrations. But in any case, this is what's happening to those 6-hour exported weapons that are being used by the National Guard primarily in these anti-migrant operations. This is just the movement of military rifles in terms of U.S. exports to Mexico. And you can see, even in comparison last year to Israel and Ukraine, Mexico is receiving a lot more military rifles from the United States than either country, which are at war, right? Fully at war, in one case, even committing genocide. So that's just to put it into some perspective. Okay, I'm going to kind of go quickly through some of these because this is documentation of where these exported weapons are going to police in Mexico. I noted that the police that committed or were involved in the Ayotzinapa disappearances received U.S. firearms, the Colt weapons, and we got receipts to show that even after that, and even after the state police in Guerrero were implicated in that crime, they received more weapons from the United States. In Tamaulipas, right over the border from the Rio Grande Valley, there has been significant exports to the state police of assault rifles, again, from 6 Hour. They were involved in a massacre in Nuevo Laredo, just over the border in 2019. And then even after that, 6 Hour exported more weapons to like within a month after they were implicated in that massacre. Then there was another massacre, again involving the Tamaulipas State Police, right at the beginning of the Biden administration, of migrants who were trying to get to the United States from primarily from Guatemala. Um, and then again afterwards, after that, there were more weapons that were exported from the United States destined for the state police in Tamaulipas. So there's no end user controls on these exports. So I'm going to skip through the rest of this to a little bit about what we can do. So, and I'm going to be quick on this particular piece because there's lots of proposed legislation at the federal level that would make an impact. Some things are more extensive than others. Some things are, like the Stop Arming Cartels Act would just prohibit the sale of 50 caliber rifles. Seems like a fairly simple thing. Banning assault rifles, assault weapons is a broader piece of legislation, um, uh, and would have a greater impact. The Armas Act does have some stuff around illicit gun trafficking, but also has some controls on legal exports, not just to Mexico, but to all of the Americas. And there's some things that the executive branch could do as well. But we know that in the current situation, these things are highly unlikely, at least right now. We want to keep setting the bar. We want to get Democrats on board. We want Democrats in Texas and Arizona to co-sponsor this legislation that involves educating them. Once we educate them, we can also ask them to do other things. It's not with the expectation that this is going to be signed into law in the next 3.5 years. But it is important to keep the Democrats at least so educated, engaged. But the other piece that I want to suggest, particularly for those of you who live in Texas and Arizona, is the possibility of doing community campaigns. This could be social media, it could be billboards, to really try to reach those people in the communities where weapons are being purchased and from which they are being trafficked. Because honestly, even though Texas and Arizona have very strong gun cultures and gun economies, and have very pro-gun laws and politicians, I honestly don't think that most people want the guns that are sold there to go to cartels. And so I think it's about how do we start that conversation so that people begin to talk about where the line should be, whether that is by legislation or whether it is by decisions by dealers and distributors and their communities of what that line should be. Okay, I'm not going to sell a 50 caliber if it kind of looks like someone who's about to just give it to their husband, right? Or any number of lines that they could draw. And so that's kind of what I want to put before you. It's not a fully developed proposal, but it is something that I think could be developed that would be an interesting way to engage this issue. So with that, I will put my information in the chat just so I can stop sharing. But it would be great to have some conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. We got a couple questions already lined up. Ben from Portland DSA wanted to know about the connection between the easy access of ammunition in the U.S. and the issue, what specific factor it plays in the issue of trafficking.
Um, Good question. And it definitely has a big factor because, you could imagine that the illicit market for firearms in Mexico is saturated and that those who want these weapons have them, right? They've been trafficking for years and years. And what they need is bullets because you can't fire those weapons without more bullets. That might be true to some extent, but mostly it does not appear to be true. Because these organizations want new weapons. It's a way to recruit and reward members. Weapons do fail over time. Some of them get confiscated or seized and need to be replaced. So, but the munitions play a part. One of the big challenges we face is that munitions are very hard to track. The importance of the munitions is often that they do have the gun, any particular gun, makes an imprint on a bullet when it is fired. So you can often, if the shells casings are recovered, and then those are matched into a database kept by the authorities, you can see whether the gun used in that particular shooting was used in another shooting where bullets were also recovered. And that does happen, right? Both in the United States and Mexico. Um, but it's so easy to get munitions. They're not regulated at all. And so we just have much further to go. I mean, it would be really good to do that. And we're much further from that even than on firearms.
Thank you so much, John. Okay, so Louisa writes, as socialists, we are committed to understanding how racial capitalism is the source of many of our social problems. Can you explain who benefits from illegal guns trafficking, why narco trafficking has had success in Mexico, who is using all these drugs, and how this feeds into the racist narratives about Mexico and the global South?
That's like five questions. Um, they're all good ones. Um, well, okay. The question of who benefits is a tricky one because in many respects, no one does. Yes, some people get money, right? But the I do believe that our destinies are connected and outcomes are connected. So it's certainly true that the gun companies, the producers, benefit both on the illicit trafficking side and on the legal export side. It's the same guns, it's the same companies. Colt, Sig Sauer, Beretta, Glock, Barrett, they're all benefiting from both sides of this flow. Um, I would say to me, where I see the the racism most evident, most direct, most obscene is in two things. One is in the narratives, right? So the narratives that the danger is on the Mexico side, right? And so therefore we have to stop anything from Mexico coming into the United States because us and the us is always thought of as being white, right? It's like that is the MAGA narrative is us is white. And therefore, we're at risk for people, things, drugs, whatever that come from the South into the United States. But our self-identification, we again as whites in the United States, we are not the source of bad things. We're the source of good things. We're the best, right? And so therefore, anything that goes from the North to the South, that's not a problem. The problem is the people who use it, right? And so the other way that I see it is in the infrastructure at the border, um, which is so focused on that south to north flow. And so, and it's also focused on moving illicit commerce. Um, but all of the drones and the sensory mechanisms and the personnel and the legal things about what it takes to cross the border, all of that is focused on the south to north flow, not on the north to south flow. So it is true, and often you will hear people say that on the Mexican side, it's very easy to get things over, but it's also true on the U.S. side. Um, maybe even more true. It's very easy you can just walk over, right? And usually and on neither side is there anybody looking for anything. Um, so those are the kind of two material ways that I see it. Um, and I know there were some other parts of the question, but I'm not retaining them.
No, that was great, John. We actually have a bunch of other questions that I'll get to, and then Luisa, if there was something that was missed, please go ahead and message, and we'll loop back to it. Um, so Patience writes, given the well-known history of U.S. agencies and their affiliates supplying and supporting cartels, have you found any contemporary red flags that would indicate this trend has continued? And in your opinion, why would the US government participate in a disingenuous conspiracy, quote unquote, like this?
I didn't catch the first part. Given the history of what participation
Oh,
in?
given the well-known history of US agencies and their affiliates supplying and supporting cartels, have you found any contemporary red flags that would indicate that this trend has continued, the trend of US agencies and their affiliates supplying and supporting cartels? Um, and in your opinion, why would the US government participate in a disingenuous conspiracy like this?
I'm not sure if the conspiracy is supplying cartels or something opposing that, but and if you can clarify in the chat, that would be great. I mean, I guess you're referring to partly at least to Fast and Furious, which was an ATF operation from 2008 to 2010, um, where ATF, which is, no, they're cops, they're a law enforcement agency, and the laws, especially then, even more than now, made it very difficult to prosecute gun trafficking cases because it's a paperwork violation, and usually not even a federal violation. And so they were trying to, catch the bigger fish, as it were. And so they were allowing guns to, quote, walk. And this happened under Bush as well, and before 2008. Um, I'm sorry, under, yeah. Um, and then the guns ended up, with criminal organizations. Um, I don't actually see that as a conspiracy to arm cartels. I think it was just a really bad law enforcement operation, a one that was callously indifferent to the impacts that it would have in Mexico. Um, uh, these organizations are pretty powerful. They have access to a ton of cash, and um, and the United States has many different interests, of course. So, of course, we can go back to the CIA arming and dealing cocaine to Nicaragua for the benefit of the Contras, or back to the wars in Southeast Asia, um, and usually it's because they don't really care about the impacts. In my view, this is just the way I'm looking at it. We can all differ on what the motives are. Um, but so I don't know, I guess that's my response.
Thanks, John. Gary also had a similar question that I think that so Gary wanted to know if there's much on a connection between corrupt military personnel and weapons trafficking into Mexico.
And Gary, if you could um, specify whether you mean Mexican or U.S. military personnel. Um, in general,
Military personnel in the U.S. I'm sorry, I didn't.
U.S.
Yeah.
military. Okay. There's a few cases, not very many. It is so much easier to get the type of weaponry that is desired by criminal organizations in Mexico through the retail market. It's just so easy. It's incredibly easy than to, like, U.S. military, they track their stocks. The risks that you take in that case are more significant. Um, I would say to some extent that's true for the Mexican military as well. The Mexican military confiscates a lot more weapons than the U.S. military does. And so the Mexican military has a lot more opportunity. If a nice weapon shows up, like is seized, to never register it and instead sell it on the open market, or make an arrangement with someone. There's certainly evidence of U.S. Border Patrol, of cops, and actually cops on both sides of the border. So there's at least 20,000 firearms that the Mexican army sold to police that were reported to the Mexican army as lost or stolen, most of which was probably moved on to other users. Um, a lot of the trafficking cases in the United States do involve either ex-military or ex-police. And, it's not that surprising because cops and soldiers become very familiar with firearms. They're comfortable with them. They might know the market. They might have their own firearms that they own. Um, and so the opportunities are greater. Um, often they are part of the gun culture, cops especially. Um, so I would turn and there's, in California, there's been a bill several years in a row to document the number of firearms stolen from police in California that's been defeated by the police lobby every time. And that suggests to me there's probably a lot of them. Um, but a lot of them are thefts, right? And they don't want to disclose that that they've had that many stolen, because it shows that they're sloppy or that they might be implicated.
Thank you, John. So Bruce writes, state police in much of Mexico are historically corrupt, often connected to criminal organizations. The National Guard, far less so. John, do you have an update on Mexico's lawsuit in mass court?
Well, one thing I would say is that the history with the National Guard is fairly short. So I'm not. It's interesting. The history with police is much longer to show that level of collusion. So there's two lawsuits, and I hope we do have a couple minutes just to hear anybody's ideas about working in Arizona and Texas, right, and communities. I would really love to hear your responses to that. Um, but just a minute about the law. Mexico, the government of Mexico in 2021 filed a lawsuit against 8 different gun manufacturers in the United States and a distributor for negligence in the marketing of weapons because they know where the weapons are going. They are involved in the tracing of crime guns that are recovered in Mexico. The ATF has to call the manufacturers first, who then say, okay, this is where we distributed them. Um, and they keep selling them to dealers that are implicated over and over and over. That case was first dismissed. Then on appeal, the appellate judge said, no, this case can go forward. The gun manufacturers then appealed to the Supreme Court, which accepted it. This is not a good Supreme Court. They heard the case in March, and they are expected to rule in about a month. And very likely, they will rule against Mexico. Highly, highly likely. Um, because of U.S. federal legislation called PLACA, or the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, which protects the gun industry against litigation for the use of their weapons. Um, Mexico is trying to get around that in different ways. It doesn't look like the Supreme Court is going to recognize it. However, there's a second case against 5 gun dealers in Arizona that was filed in 2022 that has advanced. It's now in the discovery phase, or the evidence production phase, and I think it is much more likely to advance. The connection between the dealers and the illicit use of those guns in Mexico is much closer than with the manufacturers. Um, and it's already advanced, so they're already producing evidence. From my perspective, apart from the judicial outcome of these cases, it's been very important for centering the conversation. First of all, drawing attention, that Mexico has put this much political capital into it. But also because it centered the conversation more on the producers and the US side of the equation. This is not just a border problem. This is not just a cartels problem. This is not just a Mexican character of violent problem. This is a problem of US structural violence. And that that frame, I think, is very important for all of our conversations within the United States. Because, of course, these weapons are also affecting people in the United States. And the same people who are advocating for gun violence prevention measures, because they're impacted by these laws, by these policies, by this market, um, we're working for the same thing. And if the things that are producing the traffic to Mexico were addressed, it would also benefit the United States in important ways. But again, I want to hear if anybody has any thoughts about work in communities in Texas and or Arizona.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking, John, maybe we could go ahead and open the so people can just speak directly. I'm going to see if I can go ahead and do that. I know Cindy from Rio Grande Valley chapter YDSA. She was writing about potentially doing community events. See if we can actually have you speak directly, Cindy. One sec. Uh, Sorry, got to figure out how to do this. All right. Cindy, did that work? Shoot.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes, it did work then.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry about that. So, what I was actually wondering is because, I do have to say, like, part of the history that I have related to all of this specific topic is because I used to live in Mexico and I experienced part of that gun violence, unfortunately, when I was doing it was during my elementary to all towards my middle school time that I experienced all of this shift in gun violence that it became worse over the years, especially during 2014. Um, so my question was actually related to if we could do some work towards maybe having people saying testimonies that they have like come from the Mexico to the US to escape that said gun violence because of the fact that they have maybe they felt that it was more safe to cross the border than stay in Mexico. It's very well known that usually the cartel like goes and look for certain families or certain people and try to store them and abuse them. So unfortunately, with the trafficking of guns, it makes it more likely for them to be persecuted, to be killed than anything else. So they come to the U.S. as a way to look for refugee and asylum. So um, I was really wondering about if we can do that effort into maybe having testimonies regarding that issue, or if it would be too risky due to how the current administration has been basically treating everybody.
Yeah. Well, for people who are coming from Mexico to speak, there's a number of barriers, especially now. They might not be able to get a visa. It might be risky for them back in Mexico. They might get a visa, but might not be able to return. Like there's any number of barriers. It's possible. We've done it. Um, it sounds like maybe you could be a speaker. We'd be happy to if you live in the Rio Grande Valley, we're trying to organize something in Houston in the fall. Maybe we could do it. It would be great to do an event together. Um, so let's try to connect in order to see what some next steps might be to make something happen.
Awesome. Thank you both. Daniel had a question, but I think it ties to like what ideas of what can be done, specifically around like some legislative stuff. Daniel, do you want to go ahead and just speak to your question and share any ideas you had?
Sure, yes. My question was regarding ARMA's Act in the HR 669 slash SR 25. Basically, which one would have a greater impact on the immediate time frame? Just to see, just to know which ones we can focus on here in the West Texas border, just to get the conversation going with our local representative.
Yeah. So the Armas Act has not been reintroduced in this Congress. The Stop Arming Cartels Act has, and I think Congresswoman Escobar is a co-sponsor, but I would have to check. In any case, we can So the Omnibus Act is not immediate in the sense that it hasn't been reintroduced, and that's a decision of Representative Castro, Joaquin Castro. We're like encouraging him to reintroduce it. I think a lot of the people in Washington they're just responding to so many fires that it's been challenging for them to be more proactive. But the Stop Arming Cartels Act has been reintroduced, and I think that would be one where any member of Congress, either in the House or the Senate, although no Republican's going to do it, so your senators are unlikely, but should be a co-sponsor, especially in Texas. For federal, and then there's also some state legislation, which again, we could talk offline about it. There's a couple bills, and I don't have the numbers in front of me that have been introduced. I know that the Texas legislature is, going to adjourn shortly. So I'm not sure what chance they have in this session. But, I think at the state level, sometimes it's more possible to move things forward.
Awesome. Thank you both. I also just wanted to do a quick time check. We're okay going over a little bit more, but I know you've got a pretty busy day, John. Are you okay continuing going for a little bit? All right. Great, great. So Leon actually had some ideas and questions. I'm gonna go ahead and are you okay for me to unmute you, Leon? I'll go ahead and ask to unmute, and if you are able to speak to it, great. And if not, I can read from what you shared.
Sorry, that took a moment. Yeah, one question I had, and I'm assuming you probably have done podcasts and Amy Goodman and stuff like that, but I was wondering if we could get this issue and campaign into some other, like almost mainstream media, like for example, John Oliver's show or something like that to reach a broader audience. And then the other thing is that I got this idea from yesterday. The new evil federal prosecutor in Los Angeles, sent out especially by Trump to prevent sanctuary cities from being able to protect anybody, said he's going to be focusing on, attacking immigrants in various ways. And so I was wondering whether in different areas, maybe, it's not probably going to have a big effect, but kind of as a propaganda campaign, targeting some of these district attorneys and federal prosecutors around, arrest these people who are arming, violence against people in Mexico instead of focusing on peaceful protesters and immigrants. So those were my two questions to you about the feasibility of those things.
Yeah, I mean, we would love to get this issue on Democracy Now! Or John Oliver. Haven't had the opportunity or the contacts to do so. I've had more opportunity to get in mainstream media in Mexico. But in the US, it's been a little harder, but would welcome it. So anything you or others can do to help that facilitate that would be fantastic. In terms of prosecutors, I'm also an abolitionist. So, prosecution and sending people to jail for trafficking is not my first order of business. I really want to regulate the market, right? So that's kind of a different route. In addition, a federal prosecutor, a USDA can't really prosecute without an investigation. And the investigation really does depend on the ATF primarily, which is a very weak agency and about to be weaker. I mean, the Trump people have floated the idea of blending it in with the DEA. And so they're always short on resources. I would like them to be inspecting firearms dealers more often. There are lots of firearms dealers who haven't been inspected in 10 years. Yeah, I think I'm trying to think about what ways one could frame around US federal prosecutors. And if there's a case where there's evidence that we're aware of. I mean, usually we're not even aware of the evidence until maybe later. We could, however, call for federal authorities in general, to investigate more of the places where so many firearms are being trafficked from based on the data that we got. I think that wouldn't be a bad idea, but that's that's a little bit more question for people in Texas and Arizona, where so many of these firearms are coming from.
Awesome. Thank you, John. So we've got a few more questions. Is that okay? You're okay for going a few more? All right, great. So yeah, Enrique, actually, are you okay just going ahead and speaking to your question? I'm gonna go ahead and invite you to unmute. Just gonna pull you up. And if not, I can just read off what you have, but I'll just give you a second if you are able to.
Yeah, not a problem. Thanks. Thanks for the doing this and for the information. It's really illuminating. I'm from the Rio Grande Valley. Several people from the DSA chapter of the Rio Grande Valley are on this call right now. Also shouts to Andrew for coming to speak to us at our regular meeting. Thanks for doing that and putting us on this call. Listen, a lot of the places that you mentioned, John, McAllen, Harlingen, Brownsville, of course, are in the Rio Grande Valley. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on maybe pressure campaigns at the local point of sale, or do you think there's maybe too many gun stores for that to be an effective tactic? Like, what would be your thoughts on that kind of work?
Well, I'd really like to explore it. I think, so I don't know if you all are familiar with Brady, which is a national gun violence prevention organization. And they've done some campaigns, I know some church groups have as well, that focused on the dealers themselves. So they did protests or vigils at the dealers. And the gun community is such that in a number of cases, they rallied behind the dealers, and the dealers sold more weapons. So what I'm thinking is focusing on the community itself, the community that is around the dealer, the churches, the city councils, the schools, the families, the neighborhoods, to begin, and how to begin that conversation is also a question, right? It could start with something like, what Cindy was suggesting before, of someone who's been impacted in Mexico and or on the US side, to just talk in the community and say, hey, there's something needs to be done about this. Like, what can we do about this? How can these decisions be made differently? And a lot of these gun dealers, they're really hardcore. They're like MAGA. They're all about, no, this is the way we defend ourselves against tyranny. But I do think that everybody is part of a community, right? And so it could be their wives or daughters. It could be their pastor. It could be the teacher of their kids, right? And it's not easy. These conversations are not easy, but maybe we can, begin a conversation among people who do share some common perspective about how to start the conversations, right? Practice even. Do some trainings about it. And local people would be training any of us who are from the outside at least as much, probably more than we would be, sharing anything with you. But that's kind of what I'm thinking, and I don't know how that lands. ¿Tienes alguna respuesta, Enrique?
Let me see if I can. I might have to unmute again. Sorry. I think, yeah, need to plan out better how we organize these calls at a time. All right. Apologies. Okay, yeah, Enrique, if you want to respond.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And especially, I will share my contact info with you and that of the chapter. But that makes sense. And thank you for sharing the point about how what you've seen is that what ends up happening is they just sell more arms, which is definitely something worth considering with that as a tactic. Yeah, Cindy spoke on it earlier, but it is just a common part of the lived experience, right? That a lot of folks on the border here in the region where we live, you know, they travel across the border pretty regularly, and they just kind of always have sitting in their mind the potential for this kind of gun violence to erupt at a moment's notice. So definitely, I think a very salient organizing topic for us. But thanks for this call. It's awesome. A lot of good information.
A question for Enrique and Cindy or anybody else from the Rio Grande Valley. Did the killing of the people who came, they came like they were kind of dental tourists, I'm not sure what people are called, like they went to Matamoros in order to have some dental work done. They came from, I think, Pennsylvania or somewhere on the mid-Atlantic coast. And I'm wondering if that that violence, what impact, if any, that had in the on the US side or of people talking about these issues.
And yeah, anyone from that chapter, if you want to reply, go ahead and if you just go ahead and raise your hand, or if you type in stack, I'll go ahead and unmute you. Oh, perfect. All right, so we got Cindy. Let me go ahead and pull you up. There we go. Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, so responding to that, for what I have heard, because I still have like a lot of family in Mexico, most of my family is in Mexico. For what I have heard is that in Matamoros there has been on and off, like on and off, uh, waves, if you can say so, of like the cartel disputes, like going up and like disappearing people or going and not doing anything for weeks, months, and then after that going back into square one. Um, and it's a fluctuation that has been happening like for the longest. Like we have pages in Facebook informing people about how where to actually go in bridges and stuff. Like if they're stopping people, if they have what we call the so-called ponchayantas, which is the I don't know how they're called in English, but the community in Matamoros and Reynosa and border cities specifically in Tamaulipas had a very coordinated so long that this is not really that new for us. It's more like well, this is a typical day in our community. So just stay inside, don't get off, don't go to these streets, and just ensure that your family, if they live around these areas, if they're safe, and if your family is crossing from the US to Mexico, to make sure that they're not crossing through these bridges or at these times, so they can avoid being either kidnapped or killed or encountering all of these danger situations. In that specific occasion, that specific event, as far as I know, the only thing that my family told me was, if you're gonna cross, do not cross today. That's the only thing that I have heard. But that's the only thing that I have heard on my side.
We also had something from Gary, and then after that, I had one more request I figured before we'd wrap it up. Is that okay, John? Or okay, great. 1 second, Gary. I'll go ahead and uh, all right. Go ahead, Gary.
Okay. Yes. Regarding the dental tourism shooting in Matamoros, Matamoros kind of has the reputation, I think, of being fairly dangerous. As a lot of dental tourism from this particular era to Progresso, which I believe there's some kind of arrangement among the cartels that that's like a safe area and they don't have too much activity there. So I think that's kind of how that's seen around here.
Actually, Gary, did you want to follow up with you had some questions about specifics with gun banning as like specific arms, I believe, correct? Did you want to speak to that at all, or? Oh, sorry, one second. I'm so sorry. One second. I will plan this out better for the next call. We won't have this restriction. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, well, you know, we're only talking about that Matamoros incident, but yeah, to me, the 50 caliber ban is like a doable thing because it's a thing that I don't think, if it's done right, you know, if the initiative along those lines is worded correctly, okay, I think that it wouldn't produce a lot of pushback from the gun nut lobby because of the fact of that $11,000, $12,000 price tag is going to defer most people, whereas it's not going to defer to cartels at all. I mean, to them, that's a trivial amount. Whereas anyone else, it's a big chunk of change. I mean, I mean, I could see like if it was 1,500, I could see it maybe being a problem. But 11,000, I think that's going to, you know, soften that gun nut lobby a lot, their response to something like this.
I agree. I totally agree. It's definitely a much rarer thing for people in the US to buy than an AR-15.
Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna have Eamon speak as the last comment, and then we'll do some final plugs before closing out. But this will hopefully be the far from the last conversation on this topic. I think there's a lot of potential here and a lot of interest. Eamon, and I'm apologies if I mispronounced your name. Are you able to speak?
It's okay. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's Eamon, Irish name, so that's hence the pronunciation. Yeah. So I live in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm in the DSA, and I came across this call because we are the Colt Manufacturing has its main manufacturing facility here, and they're sending. Well, they sent about 20,000 assault rifles to the Israel National Police a few months ago, and they're sending 20,000 rifles to the Israeli army next month. But we've been doing weekly vigils outside their factory because I'm mostly involved in the Palestine Solidarity organizing. But I came across your campaign because I saw that Colt had also been sued by the Mexican government. So I am just here to connect and figure out how we might jointly help each other out, because obviously we're at the point of manufacture and production here in Hartford. I mean, our main demand is for Colt to stop selling guns to Israel, but obviously it's all connected. And so I'd love to, connect you. Okay, so I got your email. And I guess, just my quick question would be, do you see a sort of a way to build this coalition? And that's what I'm brainstorming to in a way that we could mutually increase pressure on gun manufacturers. Because there's a few other deals like this. We're focused on this one because it's right in the middle of town, and I think a lot of people don't even know about it. So we're trying to increase our numbers and give them bad press. Basically, is our main goal for now, because we can't really shut anything down at the moment.
Well, I'm so glad you came today because I heard about the vigil and I saw a news account of the vigil and I saw a name and I tried to find the person. I'm like, I can't find this person. So I would love to make more contact with you about this. I've also seen the documentation on Colt's exports to Israel increased dramatically during the course of the genocide. Some of which is directly going directly to the Israeli army, mostly I think directly to the Israeli army, but there's also increased level of pistol exports that are being used by settlers and others who were not in the army. And So yes, Cult is being sued for guns from Cult that are being trafficked to Mexico, but Cult is also a major exporter. And I follow the records of exports that are published monthly by the US Census Bureau. So I can
Okay.
see where, like, if they are rifles from Connecticut, they are most likely coming from Colt.
Yep.
There's no other major producer in Connecticut. And so I can track those, and not just to Israel or Mexico, but to other countries as well. So I would love to collaborate with you to sort of figure out both what can be done to make noise, and maybe beyond, maybe more than that. We can think about
Yeah. So
what could be strategic.
great. I just sent you an email. So
Great.
Yeah.
And I want to mention one other thing for everybody, which is that we Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico convenes a binational monthly Zoom call. Andy's been on it before, and I'm not sure Bruce has, but anyway, that you're welcome to. You just contact me to get on that list. The next one is actually this Wednesday. It takes place at 11 a.m. Eastern or 8 a.m. Pacific. And it's a binational call. So we hear from people in Mexico, from people in the United States, whatever is going on. Last month we had a presentation by Sean Campbell, who wrote this amazing investigation that I put in the chat. And so, I think that's another way that we can continue to build relationships. I mean, if you want to designate one or more or a few people to kind of be your eyes and ears and mouth in those meetings, that's fine. But just let me know, right? You can contact me and we can add you to the list for that. I'll be sending out something probably Tuesday morning with a link about it. So just contact me before then if you want to be on this month's.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. So I think on that note, we'll go ahead and start to transition out. John, are there any final plugs you wanted to make, aside from the meeting that you just shared? Any final thoughts or?
So our website, which I think I put in the chat, we put a lot of material on there. So if you want to learn more, there's a lot of stuff there. We've done a couple reports in the last year that really dig into the tracing data and the export data, more analysis, more. And I guess I'm really glad that DSA folks are engaged on this. And one other thing I just want to mention is that we were invited by the Mexican presidency to organize a delegation that will be in Mexico City on June 16th and 17th with survivors and family members of U.S. mass shootings. We'll be meeting with the foreign minister, with the Senate, and hopefully with the president. In order to, we want the Mexican government to continue to be and to figure out how to continue to highlight this issue after the Supreme Court ruling in different ways. And we also want to work with them to highlight this issue in Mexico in ways that could benefit Mexico's case. So we're excited about that. You'll probably be hearing about it. We'll say something about it on that binational call this week. And I'm just super glad to meet all of you virtually for now, and hopefully again, virtually or in person later.
Thank you so, so much, John, for coming today, speaking, and just, yeah. As mentioned before, we really do hope that this is going to be the first of many calls moving forward. It seems that there have been a lot of great ideas floating around for what chapters can be doing and potential future work. We would love to consolidate that into an actual campaign. So definitely want like big local work to be happening, but we would love also in the Mexico Working Group under the DSA's International Committee to be able to weave that together and support chapters in what they're doing. So I guess first off, if you're not a member of DSA but you'd like to join, we're going to go ahead and post the Join DSA link in the chat in just a moment. We would love to have you be with us in DSA and in our organizing work for this and many, many other issues. Second, if you're not part of the international committee yet, so if you're in a local, you're doing your local thing, or if you're in national in a different body and you want to get more involved in the international work, we would love to have you get on board for that. So we'll go ahead and add we've got the Join DSA International Committee listed in there as well. And then finally, if you have interest in doing our Mexico work in particular and really helping us flesh out a campaign in this field, but we also do a lot of other really cool stuff. We've got a bunch of exciting work with Morena coming up in a bit. Please go ahead and fill out the form. Again, really hope that this is the first of many conversations and actions to come. I'll go ahead and try and send out an email very soon with just all this information and a recording of the talk, and I'll go ahead and plug in also John's mention of how to reach him, especially if you want to join for those monthly calls that are happening. But yeah, thank you so much, John, for joining us today. This was fantastic.
Thank you all. Take care of yourselves and
Thank
each
you.
other.
Thank you, you too. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you very soon. Take care.